The neutral trade corridor between the Gorlak Union and the Valari hegemony was usually quiet, a stretch of space where no one dared start trouble. But that silence was broken when a red-level distress signal echoed across frequencies, picked up by multiple listening posts. The message was short and urgent. Uncontrolled energy discharges detected. Smoke leaking from all decks. Human vessel presumed lost. Within minutes, patrol ships from both empires were dispatched to investigate. It wasn't often that a human ship sent out such a desperate signal, and everyone knew humans didn't give up easily. Suspicion mixed with concern as the two patrol beat groups approached the coordinates, expecting to find a wreck or a drifting graveyard of metal. But instead, they found something entirely different. Floating in the emptiness was the HSS Ignition, very much intact, though anything but ordinary. Flames danced from the ship's side vents, sending bursts of heat and light into space. Sparks rained down like artificial stardust along the hull. The ship trembled with deep, constant rumbling, almost as if it were alive and growling. Cautious and unsure, the patrol commanders hesitated. No one dared hail the vessel at first. Finally, the Gorlak captain ordered a surveillance drone to approach. The small craft zipped forward and latched onto the hull with magnetic legs, its camera streaming live footage. What it saw was baffling. Inside the ship's corridors, smoke drifted lazily through the air, but the systems were clearly running. No bodies, no chaos, just loud, pounding music, raw and aggressive. A human voice laughed somewhere in the distance, deep and joyful, like someone having the time of their life. The drone hovered deeper, sensors picking up high-energy readings, then picked up on figures moving through the smoke. Humans in suits, covered in soot but moving fast, shouting to each other not in panic, but in excitement. The commander of the Valari ship narrowed his eyes, thinking it had to be a mistake. This couldn't be a malfunction. Why was there fire coming out of the vents? Why was the gravity system pulsing like that? Why would anyone laugh during what seemed like a reactor failure? As more drones scanned the hull, it became clear the ship was not under attack, not disabled, not even in distress. The smoke wasn't from damage, but from something else, something controlled. Then, as if answering the galaxy's confusion, the main bay doors of the Ignition slowly opened, revealing a tall human in scorched armor, helmet off, smiling wide, eyes bright. She stepped forward, waved casually at the watching drones, and shouted, "It's just warm-up day, friends. We're not broken. We're getting ready." Her voice echoed across all channels, loud and clear. The humans weren't dying. They were training, preparing for something. The fire, the smoke, the sparks. It was all part of a system no other species had ever used before. One Gorlak officer muttered that only humans would test their weapons and engines inside their own ship. The Valari crew, known for precision and order, were stunned silent. For them, even a flicker of flame inside a vessel meant evacuation. But the Ignition was alive with controlled chaos, and its crew seemed to thrive in it. The patrol ships withdrew, to a safe distance, uncertain what to do. Was this an act of madness? Or genius? Why would anyone build a ship that looked like it was falling apart, but wasn't? Whispers spread across secure channels as word reached higher command. Humans, once again, had done something no one else would dare. They had turned disaster into routine, danger into daily practice, and fear into firepower. The Ignition floated on, its music still thundering, as if daring the universe to come closer and find out what was really going on inside. As the patrol ships hovered at a cautious distance, unsure whether to treat the Ignition as a threat or a malfunctioning hazard, a docking channel finally opened and allowed one of the Valari Gorlak inspection shuttles to connect. The boarding party was tense, expecting damaged hulls, possible casualties, and the smell of scorched machinery. But what they stepped into was unlike anything they had imagined. The air inside was hot, laced with the faint scent of burning metal, yet breathable. Red emergency lights pulsed along the ceiling, not out of necessity, but seemingly by choice. Sparks crackled from open wall panels, but nothing exploded. Instead, the ship hummed with energy, too much energy. Standing in the corridor to greet them was Captain Talia Voss, her black armor dusted in soot, her helmet clipped to her side, and a crooked grin on her face as if none of this was strange at all. "Welcome aboard," she said casually, her voice echoing down the corridor. "Don't mind the smoke. It's just a Tuesday for us." The aliens didn't know what to make of her. A Gorlak security officer checked his translator twice, confused by her tone. Talia explained with surprising calm that the fire and noise were part of the ship's internal live drill system, something the humans called a warm-up, before heading into contested space. Every human on the ship was alive, suited up in fireproof gear, and actively moving through simulated combat zones that had been deliberately set up within the ignition zone decks. What looked like disaster was actually a well-planned training exercise. The patrol team looked around in disbelief. Hatches were open, revealing heavy turrets firing into shielded walls. One hallway even had a built-in flame corridor, where crew members ran through smoke to test their breathing systems. "Controlled chaos," Talia added with a wink, "just the way we like it." The Valari commander raised an eyebrow and asked, half serious, if the humans had gone mad. A nearby technician, covered in oil and grinning through a smudge-covered visor, simply laughed and replied, "Not mad, just ready." As the inspection team walked deeper into the ship, trying to understand its strange design, scanners suddenly picked up exotic radiation readings from the core of the ignition. The energy signature didn't match any known reactor type in the Gorlak or Valari databases. It pulsed like antimatter, but it behaved with the stability of fusion. Even the Inspector Bots couldn't identify it. The lead Gorlak scientist frowned and said softly, "This is not registered technology. This is something new." The humans didn't deny it. They only smiled. When asked directly what the core was, Talia's only answer was, "It works." That answer made the aliens even more uneasy. The mystery deepened further when internal readings showed the ignition had adaptive armor, metal that repaired itself in layers, shifting based on environmental pressure and radiation. Not only that, but the AI on board was not a standard model. It responded to crew voices with attitude, making jokes, even humming along to the ship's music. "We don't build quiet ships," Talia explained as another controlled blast echoed. "Through the hall, we build them to be loud enough to scare anyone listening." The patrol team exchanged glances, their mission becoming more confusing with every step. This wasn't a damaged ship. It was something else entirely. Something new. Something unpredictable. And perhaps the most unnerving realization of all was that the humans weren't showing off. To them, this wasn't special. It was just normal. Just another day aboard a vessel designed to fight from the inside out. As the boarding party prepared to leave, the Gorlak inspector muttered under his breath, "They must be part machine." But no one dared laugh, because for the first time, both the Gorlak and Valari teams realized they weren't just witnessing strange engineering. They were seeing the next stage of warfare, and the humans were already ahead. As news of the ignition spread, the ship quickly became more than just a curiosity. It turned into a point of tension between empires. Rumors moved faster than official reports, whispering about fire-breathing engines, unpredictable human drills, and an unknown energy source pulsing inside the ship's heart. Across the stars, the Valari and Gorlak leaders held quiet meetings, debating whether the humans had crossed a line by developing a weaponized prototype without notifying the Council of Interstellar Technologies. Soon, diplomats arrived in orbit, not with weapons, but with questions. A Valari ambassador, tall and stern, demanded a full explanation on behalf of multiple governments. He spoke of treaties, risk assessments, and safety protocols, all while Talia Voss stood calmly in her command bay, arms folded, waiting for him to finish. When he did, she simply said, "It's called a hell drive." The room went quiet. Talia continued, explaining that the ignition ran on a human-developed hybrid propulsion system, a combination of quantum slipstream mechanics and raw antimatter bursts. The drive wasn't smooth, wasn't silent, and certainly wasn't safe, but it could twist through gravity wells, dive between enemy fleets, and escape where no other vessel could follow. It was designed not just to move, it was designed to fight while moving. "It's not approved yet because no one else would approve it," she added with a shrug. "But we're not waiting for permission to survive." That statement sent ripples through the gathered crowd. The Valari delegation tried to stay composed, but even they couldn't hide their concern. Meanwhile, the Gorlak observers whispered to each other, clearly impressed beneath their layers of protocol. The ship's chief engineer, a broad-shouldered man with a permanent smudge of grease across his jaw, chimed in with a grin, saying, "We don't fear damage. We weaponize it." That line, caught on a live audio feed, was replayed across dozens of systems within hours. It wasn't just a catchphrase, it was a warning. To ease growing doubts, the Gorlak Union representatives requested a controlled demonstration. They needed to see if the ship could truly handle the power it claimed to hold. Talia agreed, almost too quickly. "Hold on to something," she said, smiling not like someone preparing for danger, but like someone about to enjoy it. As the observers settled into reinforced seats within a safe deck of the ignition, the ship's crew moved into coordinated action. Alarms blared, not in panic, but as signals. Warning lights danced along the walls. The ship didn't launch, it roared. The hell drive activated with a blast of blinding light, sending vibrations through the entire structure. In seconds, the ignition twisted sideways in space, shot forward, then spiraled back, all in a pattern that made no sense to traditional flight paths but left enemy simulators unable to lock onto it. External drones trying to track the ship's movement simply lost it from sensors, confused by the constantly changing engine signature. Inside, the ship held firm. The walls bent slightly but didn't break. The self-repair system shimmered as microfractures formed and healed within moments. The corridors flexed like living muscle, adjusting to the movement. Even the seats adapted, keeping the observers pinned safely in place. For 5 minutes, the ignition danced through space like a storm barely contained. Controlled chaos. Just like the humans preferred. When it finally stopped, drifting back into calm silence, none of the diplomats said a word. They didn't need to. They had seen enough. The Gorlak team looked at each other with wide eyes, while the Valari ambassador tightened his grip on his datapad. Talia walked in slowly, brushing ash from her sleeve, and said simply, "Now you know what we mean by an upgrade. No threats, no bragging, just a quiet promise that humanity was not playing by the old rules anymore, and space would never be the same again." The Hell Drive test was meant to be controlled, a simple display of human engineering for the diplomats watching from the safety of reinforced chambers. But in the silence between the pulses of fire and motion, the real threat arrived uninvited. Sensors lit up across all nearby ships as shadowy signatures slipped into the observation zone. A pirate fleet, heavily armed and perfectly timed, clearly tipped off by someone who wanted the humans to fail or fall. The Valari ships moved to form a shield, while the Gorlak escorts prepared to retreat, uncertain whether they could protect themselves, let alone anyone else. The ignition, still glowing from its last maneuver, didn't hesitate. Before orders could be debated or warnings exchanged, its engines flared back to life with a fury that turned the darkness of space into a field of flickering orange and white. The Hell Drive roared like a storm trapped in metal, and with no delay, the ship launched forward, not away from danger, but into it. Unlike the polished formations of traditional fleets, the ignition didn't follow patterns. It spun, rolled, and surged through the incoming fire like a comet thrown off its course. Pirate missiles slammed into its hull, but the ship barely slowed. Its self-repair armor flashed and regenerated with each hit, creating glowing scars that sealed themselves in seconds. Where other vessels would dodge and retreat, the ignition charged, colliding with enemy ships, grinding across hulls with controlled fury, its side turrets shredding through engines and power cores at close range. Cameras mounted across the observation zone captured every moment, broadcasting the chaos to countless systems as the story of the human ship unfolded in real time. One pirate cruiser tried to flank the ignition, but the hell drive shifted the vessel in a way that looked more like instinct than piloting. A sudden jolt to the side followed by a flip that brought its heaviest weapons to bear in under a second. The blast tore through the pirate's center, sending debris scattering like ashes in wind. The watching diplomats stared in stunned silence, their protective chambers shaking from the force. One Gorlak scientist whispered that this couldn't be a ship. It was behaving more like a creature, reacting not by command, but by intent. Talia Voss stood at her command station, unmoved by the chaos, her focus absolute. The crew worked like parts of a living machine, calling out adjustments, patching power flows, and laughing between orders. They weren't afraid, they were alive, in a way only humans seemed to be in moments like this. In less than 10 minutes, the pirates began to break. Their ships, once bold and aggressive, now scattered like prey, but the ignition gave no chase. It didn't need to. Its message had already been sent. By the end of the fight, the battlefield was quiet again. Wreckage floated in slow motion across the stars, burned, broken, and drifting. The only ship still holding its position at the center of the chaos was the ignition, blackened from impact, scarred from battle, but standing proud and unwavering. Smoke still drifted from its rear vents, and its engines hissed with heat. But the ship was whole. The diplomats emerged from their sealed rooms, their expressions changed. What they had seen wasn't just a victory, it was a revelation. The ignition wasn't a weapon or a warship by old standards. It was something new, something terrifying, something unstoppable. And across the galaxy, on military screens and news feeds alike, one name became known beyond all others. Not because of the fire it created, but because of the fire it survived. The HSS Ignition, the human ship that didn't retreat when death arrived. It charged. In the weeks that followed the pirate ambush, stories of the ignition spread like wildfire across the galaxy, passing from soldier to scientist, diplomat to civilian, until the name became something more than just a designation. It became a symbol. Where once the ship had been questioned, even mocked for its unorthodox design and chaotic systems, it was now studied with serious attention and cautious respect. Alien engineers from both the Valari and Gorlak empires were granted limited access to examine the ignition structure, and what they found left them in awe. The fusion of unstable, near-experimental propulsion with adaptable hull armor, the living AI interface, and the ship's internal battle training zones, all of it, stood far outside the safety-first thinking of most known species. It wasn't just technology, it was attitude, belief turned into steel. And behind that belief was the stubborn human idea that survival was never enough. Endurance was the true power. Treaties began to shift as military leaders quietly rethought their doctrines. Some governments even started requesting joint training operations with human crews, not to control them, but to learn from them. The concept of resilience over perfection began to appear in strategy documents, and it was clear that a single ship had changed how spacefaring war would be seen for years to come. Captain Talia Voss became a face known even beyond human colonies. She appeared on interviews broadcast across multiple sectors, always calm, always steady, with the same answer when asked about the chaos aboard her ship. "Humans don't build perfect ships," she said every time. "We build them to survive. And fight back." And it was that line, repeated across feeds and reports, that started to echo in unexpected places. In briefing rooms of alien commanders, on the walls of new shipyards, even in quiet resistance cells trying to stand against larger forces. The ignition became more than a ship. It became an idea. Survivors of border skirmishes would later say they felt safer when they saw human ships arriving, not because of their numbers or size, but because they knew that if the humans stayed, they would never stop fighting. For the Ignition and her crew, life aboard didn't return to quiet. The drills continued, the smoke still curled from vents, and the music still blared during warm-ups. But now, the galaxy understood that what once looked like chaos was actually preparation. Controlled, calculated, human. And soon, something strange began to happen. Emergency signals across space would occasionally mention unusual internal fires aboard ships, followed by silence. Instead of panic, command centers would lean forward and ask one question first. Not, "What's the damage?" Or, "Is it hostile?" But something simpler. They'd ask, "Is it human?" Because now, fire didn't always mean trouble. It meant someone was getting ready. The legacy of the Ignition was not built on size or strength, but on a kind of courage that could not be programmed into machines or built into metal. It came from within, from humans who trained in fire, worked through pain, and laughed through smoke, not because they were reckless, but because they had learned to stand inside the storm and make it theirs. Even alien veterans, some of whom had fought dozens of battles, admitted they had never seen anything like it. To them, humans had become the species that didn't avoid fire. They walked through it. And as the ship drifted quietly in the edge of known space, preparing for its next mission, the Ignition stood as proof that sometimes survival isn't about avoiding damage. It's about becoming the kind of force that doesn't break when tested, but only burns brighter. That's why, in every language, in every sector, whenever someone spotted smoke where there should be none, the same message repeated, half serious, and half in fear. If it's a fire, make sure you know whose ship it is, because if it's human, it's already too late to stop it.